We're back for another episode of the OGX podcast. I am the host today. Just the two of us. I am the host. Krista is out of town. So Laura and I will be recording today's topic, which is we're going to center this discussion around high school level athletes. So we're recording this. It's the very end of July. This is the week of nationals for most athletes. I think maybe at least the 18U athletes in whether it's California for PGF, whether it's Alliance in Indianapolis. And we've been having a lot of discussion with our high school level OGX athletes about like, what do I do afterward? And so this came up in a full team meeting that we had earlier in the week. And we were like, hey, what a great topic for podcast. And there's a lot of education, a lot of information, a lot of things that we discussed as a team, wanted to make sure that we were discussing with our coaches at OGX as far as the types of things we should be talking to our athletes about, how to communicate and educate them appropriately. So why not bring the topic onto the podcast?
I think it's a great topic.
Yeah. So basically here's the crossroads that a lot of, I think, athletes find themselves in. They are totally spent. I mean, they are exhausted. Their families are exhausted. They have been traveling so much. They're just mental, emotional capacity for the game right now is just like so low, right? And so we want to recognize that. So it's hard to even come at them right now with this like, let's capitalize. You have this off season in August. Let's capitalize and achieve this and go after this. It's sort of like, dude, read the room, you know, like that's
it's too much.
Yes. And so that is kind of where our discussion started in our full team meeting at OGX was more of a like, read the room. Your athletes are absolutely exhausted and they're probably communicating like on X that's like, what an amazing this, that, and because it's this like mask, but deep down what they're probably saying to their like best friend is like, I'm so glad I get a break, right? So it's like, it's understanding that, it's respecting that for the athletes, but also helping to educate them in a way that's like, listen, you can take the break you need, but also let's make sure that we do it in a way that's really smart, that is like calculated, let us help you navigate that, etc. So on Monday, when we had this discussion with our team, we also talked about like the different scenarios. One is if there are athletes that are coming out with like pain. There's athletes that are like, they have been pushing through pain these last couple of weeks of the season. These are maybe some of the athletes where they may need to take some time and maybe take some time beyond like a standard 2 weeks. If we're in this world of like, what, you know, is it pain that essentially like is not going away with a few days rest, etc. For the most part though, and as we always remind ourselves, Laura, you feel free to chime in with this, pain does not equal injury.
No, right.
Pain is the body's signal. It's alerting the brain that there's something there. If we continue to ignore it and we fail to take the necessary steps or action, to take the necessary measures, I guess, to squash that pain and to navigate around it, it can turn into injury. So I think most of the time we're just dealing with athletes who are like, I've had posterior shoulder pain. My back is starting to bother me. Things that in this typical 2-week time period, it usually subsides when we remove the task of pitching, remove the task of hitting whatever's going on, and then we can build from there. So I'm going to kind of lay out how the discussion we ultimately had as a team on Monday, and then you can chime in with, where this comes from and what we've learned over the years, et cetera. So most of the time, what we tell our athletes to do is, first and foremost, once they finish, it is okay to remove the skill for probably about 2 weeks. Most of them have the time to do that. We always say, when you're considering taking time off, don't forget to consider the ramp up. The ramp up, in general, it's not perfect, is about a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning the amount of weeks you take off, you should ramp up those amount of weeks. So if you take off the first 2 weeks of August, you are going to spend the remaining 2 weeks off of ramp up. And reminder, also pitch stop, big discussion about this is your topic at pitch stop. Ramp up is not about performance. It's about just dosing, volume, intensity, different variables, and making sure your body responds positively to that we don't have any type of excessive soreness, pain, etc. So that means that you would spend basically the month of August off, right, from like training for performance. And then that would start in September, which works for most athletes because they don't start playing in the fall again until the end of September, October. Now, the overwhelming majority of cases, what we see is we're tracking our athletes throughout this summer season. And most of them have even come from a high school season in the spring right into summer, right? Is that their movement quality is terrible. Their stability is terrible. They have just jumped ship on strength and conditioning because it's been just like so difficult for them as they're traveling. They just like the idea of adding anything else feels so overwhelming to them. And so what we usually advocate is to spend those 2 weeks like really going back to your foundation and rebuilding your stability, strength, etc. in strength and conditioning. You can remove the skill for 2 straight weeks. It actually feels like a lot of time. When you haven't even had 2 days,
right.
2 weeks feels like, like a lifetime to these athletes. And then remember, you spend the next 2 weeks, I'm going to talk pitching specifically. You are going, just 3 days a week. You're throwing plyos only, low intensity only. It really does feel like an extensive break to these athletes. So I think for any athlete out there, any parent who's like their daughter thinks like I need way more than 2 weeks, I would really advise against that because, the turnaround for the fall season actually happens pretty quickly. And I think if you are stuck in the culture where you think that what training looks like is full intensity, 43 feet, go, 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 go. Yeah, your daughter does need a break from that.
Right.
But 2 weeks of remove the skill, 2 weeks of then dose it back. Now she can go into September and she's ready to like hit the ground running, right? And so that's usually what we advise. Strength and conditioning is of the utmost importance during this time. And what we are advocating big time, not only to outside athletes who are not in OGX at the time, right now training with us, but our current athletes who are just in our system on a regular basis, this is really one of the most important times to get another biomechanics assessment. So we've been really starting to talk about, the idea of biomechanics assessment of like, when do I get them? Ideally, our athletes who have a training package with us that the biomechanics assessments are built in, the time frame would be August, November, right? So at the end of the summer, the beginning of off season at the end of the fall season, like February, March at the end of off season, and then right between the transition of like spring to summer, which is like end of May, right? Those would be the 4 times that we would say in an ideal world. Now, some of our athletes and some athletes out there are just kind of picking random times to do a biomechanics assessment. We would say priority 1, the number 1, if you do 1 assessment a year, the best time for it would probably be in November, right? That is when like you're kicking off your off season. We now know what to target in training, what we're going after. You can chime in about this like degrading value of a biomechanics assessment. You can't get one time and then 3 years later still be training off of that information, right? I mean, you can, but it's not great. But the next time that we would recommend, if you're going to prioritize 2 biomechanics assessments a year, we would say go for the beginning of off season and now, because this is also your like mini off season that you have in August, September before this like 2-month fall season. And so we are encouraging a lot of athletes out there to like come get a biomechanics assessment now. This is the time, because what you don't want summer to fall to turn into is I'm exhausted. Let me just take this time off. Then let me just start training again based off of what? Based off of things I think. And then basically I'll be slightly fresher in the fall, but I'm just going to be the same version of myself in the fall that I was in the summer. And we can take a much more targeted approach to you showing up in the fall, elevated from where you were in the summer, not just because you aren't as exhausted. And is that going to be true even? You're going to have school under your belt now in the fall? Like, let's not make the assumption you're not going to be as exhausted, right? So I think this idea of like, we can target this time period. You can maximize your off time. We can target ramp up it with a really strong 2-week protocol. Get a biomechanics assessment, know exactly how to leverage what you're doing, how to maximize it. Boom, you've got these 8 weeks, and now we can reset for the off season. So that's in a nutshell how this discussion went across our team on Monday. Laura, I'm going to pass the torch to you a little bit here just to kind of go into some of these details of like why that's our recommendation. And maybe even give some examples of where an athlete has done that, not done that, et cetera.
Yeah, as we were talking on Monday during full team, my brain kind of kept going back to what we've really, I think at the heart of our assessment process is really sort of a stress test, so to speak. It really can give us an indicator because of the way we utilize it with having low intensity movements, things related more maybe to strength and conditioning and what we call movement quality, understanding power, right, and these snapshots. But you mentioned the kind of degrading value of the biomechanics assessment. It does not mean that you shouldn't get one. It just means that it needs to be another layer of your monitoring. It needs to be an additional layer of your monitoring. What we see at these points of the year, so now in November, and we turn around after high school, usually out of the off season, we're feeling pretty good, right? Because the volume of game stress, we hope, has been mainly eliminated. Maybe we're talking about a random tournament here or there, or a camp, or a series of camps. That's always a tricky thing to navigate, but what that assessment really can help us and to help the pitcher to understand is like, what has the game sort of done to me at this point? And the reason you want that at multiple points throughout the year is that your body will change. As you mentioned, you're like, hey, we're going to take the month of August off. But I always think we're going to start our college assessments here in a few weeks. I always think like those freshmen into high school, freshmen into college, same concepts, like they're going to be stressed. The change of environment, there's lots of things going on at the start of a school year that already.
Yeah, and side note, they usually look terrible.
That's right. Like
they look terrible. Yeah.
Right. The freshmen that we see on college campuses, and it's not their fault. This is not a criticism that they didn't do enough to prepare themselves. It's that usually this combination of they've played all summer, maybe they're on with a travel organization that, kind of respects the fact that they're heading off to college and maybe plays limited tournaments or prioritizes tournaments. They're exhausted. And I just think that assessment, when we go, and I'm going to go back to high school in a second, but when we see those college freshmen, I'm like, this isn't the best version of you, and it's not really unfair that we're having an assessment, but we got to know where you are. And I think that's really the crux of it, is you got to know what has game stress done to your body? What has game stress done to your mental, your physical fatigue, your emotional fatigue? And so our assessment can get to the physical part of it, obviously, with understanding all of the complexities of not just the pitching motion, but all the things that feed it, and all these different pieces, especially linking, obviously, the biomechanics to ball flight and understanding that from a performance side. But I have absolute respect for pitchers that need mental breaks, emotional breaks, even physical breaks. I think what we have to just be thoughtful of is that the reality of our high school athletes right now is that they play almost all year round. When we're talking about an off season, there are some athletes that might get a month, and you can we're not even talking about multiple sports. We're going through the lens of that they're just playing softball. So never mind multiple sports in that conversation. That they may not get this significant, 3-4 months off that maybe another player might have. And you have to know at these transition points throughout your year, what do I look like? Because going into, again, remember how we time these now after travel ball season, again, get a sense of like, I've got a little bit of a break. What do I need to maybe hone in on? I'm headed to a camp. I should know what my pitch types look like. If I'm a pitcher going to a camp at the end of August and I haven't seen my ball flight since February, I want to make sure I've got that under my belt. So when I go to that camp, I know what I'm throwing to put myself on the best stage possible, even though I might be exhausted.
Laura, I always use this analogy. Stop applying to Harvard with a 23 ACT just because you don't know you have a 23 ACT. It's like you can't get in. I don't care how hard of a worker you are. I don't care how hard you hustle on and off that field. You can't get into Harvard with
numbers are numbers.
23 ACT because they have to start with a threshold of here's where it cuts. And then we'll observe those characteristics in the athletes that cross that threshold for us. So if you know where you stand before you spend your fortune going to a camp, all your time, all your whatever, you've got to know. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think where I see in the coaches that I get the opportunity to talk to about, how their summer went recruiting and what this process looks like right now is they're looking for a combination of things. Coaches that are really, I think, refining their recruiting process and are really trying to make it more efficient because it can be very inefficient. The amount of travel, the heat, the amount of games, weather, all of it can be very inefficient. They need two sources. They need to see you in a game, no question. There is still value of seeing someone's in-game presence. But the other side of it then is they're either going to, hey, I really liked her on the rubber that weekend, let's invite her to a camp and get some more information. So if they're going to do that process anyway, wouldn't you want to be ahead of that process? I guess is what I always sort of say to our families is like the assessment, whether you do it one time right now, especially in preparation, we've got September 1st coming, we've got, maybe some hearts soaring and some hearts breaking on September 1st this year. Don't you want to know that college offer or the coach you're going after is that's a right fit for you? I think you need to know that. And I think it absolutely demystifies recruiting on both sides. And so, whether they see you at a game and then invite you to a camp or you come get an assessment and we are able to translate that information for them, or you start at a camp and they see you in a game. Either way, you have to have both. But I'll say, the majority of coaches right now are like, I see you in a game, but I also need to see some concrete information about you. Because as we all are, starting to really understand, pitching patterns don't stay the same throughout the year, right? We've established that. And so I think you have to know at this time of year, especially, what did my high school, if I played high school this spring, what did my high school season plus my travel ball season, what did it leave me with right now? What am I left with right now? If I have a camp at the end of August or sometime in September, what am I bringing to the table? I think by just that alone, an assessment at this time of year is a necessity for that. And, I always think about as I say, this comment of like, we're really in the business of like stress management, which is, I think, very real for the way our training protocols are applied, the way our assessment is designed. And coming into an assessment is not about whether you're good or bad. I always like to clarify that. It's not about you're good, you're bad, and we put you in a bucket. It's just about you and what do you need right now. And sure, there are benchmarks because most of the time this conversation, particularly at the high school level, is driven by recruiting, right? So of course we're going to have benchmarks. We're going to talk about, your experience, especially with college consulting in season of like, you're a one-time through the lineup, you're a two-time through the lineup at this level. Is that what you want? That alone, I think, is just the most value to come out of that biomechanics assessment. It's really about stress management. And so those multiple points in the year we're talking about are key points of transition. And you've got to know as you're making that transition, in my opinion, what you're dealing with, especially if you're having recurrent soreness. I've taken out the use of the word soreness, to be honest. We've talked about it as pain because it is pain. We don't want to downgrade it to soreness. When your shoulder is in pain after pitching, you are in pain. It doesn't matter if that number is a 1, a 2, and it's not a 7 or an 8. I think we oftentimes ask athletes to distinguish between pain and soreness, and I would argue right now there really shouldn't be a difference between that. Your body is still sending a signal, regardless of what the intensity is.
It's like semantics at that point.
It is. And so, I think coming around the bend now, I think there are, we have a lot of our current assessments are, we're middle schoolers, maybe early high school, and I'm like, that is awesome, and we want them here. We want them to keep doing those assessments and training with us. But I also think about like those high school juniors and even high school seniors that maybe are nervous about September 1st and maybe just want to make sure that they know their story so that if it goes the way they want or it doesn't go the way they want, they're still armed with information about who the heck they are right now. And I think that's a really critical piece to kind of navigating, especially in that recruiting world, navigating what comes next for them, for sure.
Yeah. I think I wrote a couple notes as you were talking there, and I think this one concept of like max performance. The assessment is not about measuring your max performance. You're rarely at your max performance just because of the nature of the game.
You're long.
And so I think of like you're rarely at max performance. The one of the biggest, I think, benefits of the assessment is to literally see exactly where you are in the now. It obviously gives us a lot of information on like where, I don't want to say a ceiling because a ceiling means like a stop, but you know what I mean by that concept of like, okay, based on this, we think you could get to this quickly and this quickly. So it gives us an idea of where you can get to, I would say.
It's almost a little triaging. It's like we know that, okay, we're talking about maybe refinement of a pitch profile, or we're like, hey, that pitch is not working, or we can make one single hand position. Those are obviously very short term in the moment, which our assessment should inform. But then you're right, there is more of a long term, I don't want to say predictability, but we can see that if patterns stay the way they are now without influence or change, we see that road ahead for that pitcher.
Yeah, and we also know what patterns are unlikely to change and what's are simple to change. Like, right. So, but what I'm getting at is this idea of like, we're always chasing, and by we, I mean like the athletes and their families, they're always chasing max performance. And what I think is interesting is like, if you're going to have a shot at getting at max performance, you have to measure where you are, which then provides the most like targeted approach of like what to go after and what not. It's like immediately it's like, here's the lowest hanging fruit. You got this, you got this, you got this, go do this, right? So I think it is this kind of wild concept of like what assessment about is not about measuring max performance. It's about seeing how to basically get there as quickly as possible. And so it's about efficiency of that process. And so if you are in the world of like, I want my daughter to get to max efficiency or max, performance for where she is in the now, but you don't go after these measurements, like it's just hypocritical. And I don't mean that to be like, I don't mean that to be overly critical. You are, it's just like kind of wild. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. I also think this idea of September 1st is interesting in the standpoint of like, sometimes I think athletes make the assumption like the summer is what is going to dictate my September 1st. The overwhelming majority of athletes who get calls on September 1st are like, we're going to continue to watch you this fall. And we have watched so many athletes make the mistake of like, they're so exhausted. They didn't maybe take a break at all. They just kept going to like seek this max performance without taking into consideration maybe the rest they needed, what their patterns looked like, what we needed. A plan. Basically what I'm getting at is they never took this opportunity to create a plan. Do you need time off? Do you need more time off than most people? Do you need less time off for most people? Why? Like, that's what we're getting at, is to like take this moment, take a breather, take what you need mentally, emotionally, find out what your plan really should be. And so we've watched athletes just like keep churning because they're like, gotta grind it out, gotta go. And September 1st, the conversations were about, we're going to continue watching you this fall. We're very interested. And they didn't perform that well in the fall, but because why would they, right? There was never this opportunity. So I guess what we're really trying to say in a nutshell here is forget the September 1st. Sometimes I can't stand September 1st because I just feel like it sets up. I really can't. It's just like this build up to more of a conversation that's like, keep me and you, and we're going to keep yes. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that what we're trying to get to is this, like, create a plan. You can actually maximize your time off if you have the right plan in place, right? And so we're like, the best way to attack this time of year, going back to my initial, like, dude, read the room, is not this like, yes, it's a mini off season, let's crush it. And our athletes are sliding down the wall. That's the read the room. This is the conversation, and what we talk to our coaches about is like, this is how we want to communicate with our athletes. Take a breather. Reflect on all you've accomplished over these last couple of months. Take a breather. Let's measure where you're at right now. Let's measure where your stability, your strength are, what we can attack in strength and conditioning. Let's measure whether we see your health and wellness. We're seeing if we have anything, other factors to consider, which is like any pain. Let's measure where you are pattern-wise, ball flight-wise. We've got everything on the table. Now let's create a plan that is targeted, that is efficient, that maximizes the time you need physically, mentally, emotionally to take a breather, and also to accomplish X when you return in the fall, right? And so I think that's what we're really talking about here. And so I think this time of year is so interesting because it's this collision of, I think when athletes and families get it wrong, I don't mean to say like get it wrong, but like are not maybe doing it the best way that it should be done. It's when they mismanage time off. Like I wrote down camps because I was thinking like athletes they take off like 2 weeks after nationals and then they have a camp.
Yeah, it's wild.
And so it's wild. So we're just like, no, right? Like you can't expect to go like 0 to 100 like that. So they mismanage time off. Maybe they take none at all and they needed to, or they take too much and then try to go for it without a ramp up or understanding how performance suffers after time off, which is totally fine as long as you build in a ramp up.
It's normal deconditioning. I think
absolutely
take softball out of it. Anytime you take that level of stress and physical activity away from the body, it's going to change. I mean, that's right. It's just what you're just going to decondition. Every athlete goes through that.
Right. And so we often see this collision of two major concepts that I think we feel so deeply educated in and like, let us help you, is a mismanagement of time off and a talk about blindfolding yourself and then going behind the wheel and trying to navigate max performance when it's just like you've got no idea what you're going for, and you put all of this pressure and stress on September 1st and then the fall and then showing up, but there's no plan, right? And you're saying like get ahead of what you look like, where you need to be, etc. So, you know, I think about like the athletes that are like, I just need to go up in velo. All the college coaches have said, if I just go up in velo, then that's where I need to be. And we're like, okay.
It's been the most common statement I've heard all summer.
Right. And so I'm like, if that's true, if you're at this like threshold of like, okay, if we can get you to go up in velo, but one, do you have any idea where velo is coming from for you? Like we are seeing athletes where like their speed at which they're moving, their power profile is so low. So it's like, if you don't identify where the velocity like bucket is most influenced for you, is it like this strength and conditioning power, you know, how fast you move in the motion? Is it inefficiency in the motion, meaning we're not getting enough rotation, we don't have enough length in the arm is out of time? Like there's so many different places of where we're talking about with when it comes to velocity. If you don't even know where that is, this is not even a discussion we can have, because you're just going to spin your wheels, right? Then it's like what we often actually see with athletes, it's like you going from 59 to 63 is not going to influence your collegiate career. Instead, you need to understand that in the grand scheme of pitchers at the collegiate level, you are not a high velo pitcher. We're talking you're not throwing 68 plus. So if you're not throwing 68 plus, then it's all the same, right? And so instead, what levels of break and variability do you produce? We think we can add an off speed here. What if we create variability off that pitch by teaching you how to do this versus this, right? Like it's so targeted and efficient. I think that is a perfect way of being able to explain based on these variables. We don't anticipate that you are going to go from this velocity to this velocity, and here's why in that time frame. And so because of that, stop considering yourself that like velo's your ticket. It's not, but variability is, and here's how we can get that. And you're actually much more likely to get, you know, have higher levels of swing and miss rates, to start to catch some eyes in the fall season if you do this. But there's just no way of doing that. I just feel like a lot of times athletes are they have this idea of who they are and what they do and what they need to do, and they just keep chasing. It's like this catching the tail concept that came up last week's episode, right? Chasing your tail is this like, they're just trying to keep chasing the tail of some like idea of what they are without the information. So it's lack of information, a lack of planning meets mismanagement of time off. It's the collision of those pieces. And we're your people. Utilize us for at least one, if not both. We are your people. I mean, I think that's why we feel like this is such a powerful topic to sort of like to announce out there to non-OGX athletes and also current OGX athletes. Our current OGX athletes get the benefit of us helping them manage their workload. Mm-hmm. It's embedded in their everyday programming and training, but assessment is something different. The add-on of an assessment is something different. So this message and this topic applies to all athletes, whether they're working with us right now or not.
Yeah, and I think even, you know, as I kind of take a larger view back of this concept of like getting assessed multiple times per year, knowing who you are. We've talked, I could talk ad nauseum about the influence of puberty in pitchers and all of the chaos that ensues from that. I've had a lot of conversations this week with athletes that are just navigating that. I want to be clear though, that when we talk about the puberty transition, we talk about peak height velocity, meaning that growth spurt up just reaches its fastest point. It doesn't stop. So high school pitchers are still growing. And if you are adding strength and conditioning to that, you are adding mass to your body that has to be renegotiated, right? So if you go through a training cycle, let's say that's 12 weeks of an off season, and you have put on 15 pounds of solid mass, you are more powerful, you're lifting heavier. That is amazing. It does not automatically translate to your pitching motion. It's too complicated. Meaning we have to train that to work up into the motion. And so, this idea of I'm just going to get an assessment maybe as a freshman, or I'm never going to know what my patterns are until I'm a senior, and it's sometimes too late. Whether that's pain and injury, whether that's, the performance trajectory they thought they were on is not realistic now. It's so incredibly hard to change those ingrained patterns. We talk about that all the time. But your body is still changing. So I've said this multiple times in the last few weeks to some of the parents of our high school athletes. You still want that assessment, because there have been great examples in our facility, athletes training, and maybe she's particularly tall, or she just is growing. She's like, man, I've been really struggling with my command. And, one of us asked a question of like, well, are your clothes fitting a little tighter? Are your shoes tighter? And she's like, actually, yeah, I had to go buy new jeans last week, because she grew 2 inches, right? It doesn't mean that growth stops. It just means it slows down. And so it can be a little insidious, meaning those changes in growth, as you add hopefully strength and conditioning, you're going to add body mass just naturally, that you have to have those checkpoints of, are your patterns moving in a healthy direction? Set performance aside for a second, but are they moving in a healthy direction? Are you setting up your arm to have longevity in order to accept the forces it needs at the timing that it needs to throw as hard as you can? And it is a shifting foundation for a lot of athletes. And so that's where I think that the biomechanics assessment at multiple points in a year at least tells you if you're dealing with the same thing you did last cycle, and can we progress, or do we need to take a step back and maybe retool some things while your brain and body continue to connect themselves. We make this assumption that, like, I think sometimes that, like, puberty hits and this is her body and it's what it's going to be, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not what a human being is. And so she's still growing. I mean, there are years after puberty until kids reach their skeletal maturity. It's going to take time. And so that level of assessment, in addition to just, obviously being very clear with who you are and what your current performance is like, let's just like keep an eye on some things that are still changing, albeit a heck of a lot more slowly, but let's keep an eye on some things that are changing. Those assessments in my mind are just they're a top layer of monitoring for athletes that are seeking that depth of performance and want to chase it, that want to know themselves. I mean, it's such an amazing starting point for that conversation. And again, I just want to reiterate, it's not about good or bad. It's not about whether you fit into a good bucket or a bad bucket. Those conversations are not about being in one or the other. It's about who you are and what really the position has done to you and how you're going to battle back from that, whether pain or injury or performance. But it's, I'm very biased, obviously, as, we've created this assessment, but the value of it. I mean, I just see the relief that families feel. I can feel the relief from the athletes when, we say like, hey, we program 3 days a week, right? We see your patterns, and we know that 3 days a week with strength and conditioning and pitching, some rest, some good workload management, we feel pretty confident in that. But the wild card is always chasing all the other things. We sometimes can think we have an amazing plan with a family or with a pitcher, and we're going in the same direction, and there's just like squirrel, like distracted, something on social media. And I don't blame them. That's what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to tug you in these directions. And so even more so that assessment, that process needs to be your foundation. And then you can be very selective and be very discriminatory, essentially, of like what you choose to listen to then and what fits your story. And then I think it takes out all the noise. You talk about this all the time. It takes out the noise. It gives you what you need, and it takes out the noise, and then you can select what you choose to let influence you.
Yep. I think going back to the concept of our current OGX athletes, so these are athletes that train with us on a regular basis, there's no doubt about it. Okay, you started maybe off with an initial assessment. We got this information. We created this plan. Are we going to do a much better job of managing your workload throughout the year? Absolutely. Are we more educated than most people on understanding, like, okay, we are going after more sink on drop ball. How do we do that? How do we program for that? Is the program likely more thoughtful, more educated, more individualized? Yes, right? But there comes a point where we can't see everything with our eye. And if we could, we wouldn't have a lab.
That's right.
So, I mean, there's just a reality. We wouldn't have a lab if we could just see it all with our eye. So there comes a point where we're not seeing everything. We're following, yes, here's this initial assessment. Here are the goals. Here's how we think we're going to attack it. we're gonna build that program, and then throughout the year going to take into consideration all of the external factors that you have going on, the external variables of playing, vacation, sickness, I hurt my elbow, whatever, and keep fluctuating that plan based off of that. But let's be clear, that program, yes, it has the feedback loop of constant data, but it's all based off of the goals and the baseline level of information from that assessment that happened a year ago. So there is this world where we are missing things. Of course we are missing things. We cannot see things with our eyes. Like I said, then we wouldn't have a lab. We wouldn't have these cameras that are able and to spit out this level of data. And so I also sometimes think now that we have this elevated level of biomechanics data, it's important for our current athletes to understand that getting that is incredibly important. And for our athletes who are training all year long, whether it's remotely or especially in-house, I think maybe they are under the assumption that they're maximizing what we have. We've got tech every day. They're in HQ. They're seeing their data. Right. They've got the education of OGX coaches. Is that so far beyond an average pitching lesson? Obviously. But there's an extra layer here. I mean, truly maximizing being a part of OGX is staying up on some regular level of biomechanics assessment. And like I said, for the athletes who it feasibly, logistically makes sense for them and their families to just build it in those 4 times a year, amazing. But then start to work backward. Can I do 2 times a year? Can I do 1 time a year? But to not do at least 1 time a year, which in our minds is the bare minimum, you're falling back into this yeah, you're part of OGX. Yes, we're definitely going to be able to do all of these things for you better than the average pitching coach. I mean, it's apples to oranges. However, it is important to understand that there's this piece here that we're missing. We're just going to be missing things because we don't have it. So I think that's really a big piece of our conversation, right? It's the power of the biomechanics assessment. It's not just for the athlete and their education. It is also for us coaches to see that layer of information that cannot be seen with the eye. Not because our eyes are not good enough, but it's just not possible for the human eye to see that level of data and information. So, I think that this is this because this time period is one of those major times. We said it is number 1 time to get one is probably this November, December. The number 2 time is this August. So I think if you're sitting out there and you're listening to this and your daughter already is involved with OGX at some point, you've got to really ask yourself, what's my plan to make sure that the training and programming that her coaches are doing at OGX are working off the most updated level of information as possible. What's my plan to make sure that I've got a system in place for that?
Yeah, and externally to us, pitching instructors, across the world, we're not your adversary, I promise.
Right.
The number of athletes we've had in the last few weeks that I've either talked to in a sales conversation or we've had them in the facility for an assessment have said I work with this instructor. They sent me here because they don't have access to this equipment.
Sure.
Heck yeah.
Right.
That is the relationship I think that is so valuable, that puts the athlete at the center of this conversation, is the instructor saying, hey, look, I'm an individual instructor. Maybe I do this on my own property, or I rent a small space. I don't have the means to, be full blown with a launch pad and all of the bells and whistles. No problem. You don't have to be. We can do that for you. That we're not your opposition in that. And so the end result of that process is a report and a debrief conversation that instructor can listen to, and I always tell athletes that are remote, our best remote training product is when the local instructors, whether they're the strength coaches, the personal trainers, the pitching instructor, doesn't matter, the high school coach, when we are all on the same page. Not that they're on the same page with us, but that we are all on the same page. And that, starting from a point that is it's objective, it is clear in connecting performance to your pitching patterns. That's the apples to apples conversation for the pitching instructor. And so I love when we get repeat assessments from pitching instructors that are sending their athletes to us, that they find the value in as well. They're learning alongside their own athletes. The athletes that train with us, of course, they're going to have the advantage of working directly with us, but just coming for assessments, even if you're local and have a local instructor, are still they are still so vital and so important, and information you can bring back to your instructor. We want to help you in that regard.
Yep. So I think if we just had to summarize this, I think, one,
come
being
assessed.
sensitive. Yeah, come get assessed, right. Is not come get assessed, but yes, come get assessed. Is to really empathize with our athletes and families on their level of just overwhelm right now and fatigue, et cetera, et cetera. That's super important. But to then recognize that, make sure they understand you feel that, that you're taking that into consideration, but then, ask the questions. What is the plan for time off related to what you're working back to, whether it's camps, whether it's just your fall season? Is there a thoughtful plan, or is it just random? Okay. So that's one question. And the other is when you're going to return to performance, whether it's in August, September, based on if it's just for fall season, it is, for camps, et cetera. What level of information are you armed with to really attack that? Because likely your athlete is going to take a little bit of time off, so you're going to have a short period of time to then go after it. What level of information are you armed with to go into that time period? And is the information you're armed with something relevant to the time you're in? Is it outdated? Is it current? Right? I think these are all the concepts we have to really ask ourselves. Is it is a very wacky time. It's between August and October, you're in off season, preseason, and season all over again. It's this really quick. It's literally taking November through July, and then you just literally crunch it together. And then you go through that all over again in August, September, October, November, right? You just 4 months you go through, what you did the entire
year, maybe
absolutely.
Sport,
it's its own whirlwind. And so I think we're go in prepared, literally
yourself.
Yes, take the time you need, recover from the craziness that was March, and again, not everyone's high school season is the same, but March through July. Recover from that time period, and now educate yourself, create an educated plan, and then make sure it's as efficient as possible, it's as targeted as possible. It takes into consideration the individual variables that you're facing in this time period, so that this next couple of months doesn't just become a whirlwind where everything feels overwhelming again. We can prepare so much better for that time period. So I think that's really what this discussion is really centered around. So hopefully for those of you that are listening, again, whether you're currently an OGX athlete or you're not, and you're just, in this overwhelm of I just need to sit back, I don't know what we're doing, we just need a breather. We get it. But also, you don't have to sacrifice one or the other. You just got to be efficient in what that plan really looks like.
Yeah.
All right. Great discussion. It was a great discussion on Monday. Of course, we think it's a great discussion because it's between the two of us, but it was a great discussion with our team on Monday. We felt so strongly about it that we thought it was worth kind of like I said, getting onto this podcast and announcing it more to the external audience. So hopefully there's a few nuggets here that people can take, and it helps them evaluate, not even just their plan for this time of year specifically in this August, September, but also helps them kind of navigate seeing the year as a plan, putting in place plans throughout the year. Hopefully it even just helps you understand how important that is as well. So as always, thanks for joining us in today's podcast. Hopefully you learned something. As Krista always says, make sure you subscribe, etc., so we can keep things rolling. Feel free to send topic ideas our way. Next week, I believe we will have Krista rejoining the crew. So I'll slide back into, I will not be hosting. Yeah, that's right. But until next time, we'll see you back here with the next episode. OGX Nation, we love you. We appreciate you. But we'd love you even more if you would subscribe to this podcast, give us reviews, send us comments on what you want to hear. Then we'd really, really love you. Got to do it. Do it now.